On a cold afternoon in late 1941, over the deep blue waters of the Pacific, the serene quiet of the ocean was suddenly shattered by the roar of aircraft engines and the terrifying crash of naval gunfire. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor plunged the United States overnight into the catastrophic arena of World War II. Smoke billowed from what was once the most powerful battleship fleet of the United States Navy, leaving their primary Pacific force severely crippled. Yet, right behind that rising smoke lay the single greatest turning point in the history of naval warfare. The era of giant battleships commanding the seas was officially over. Maritime dominance had abruptly shifted into the hands of floating airfields known as aircraft carriers. To win this war, America needed a naval force capable of not just projecting power across vast oceanic expanses, but completely neutralizing any enemy threat. That desperate necessity gave birth to the most durable, powerful, and technologically formidable industrial marvel in naval history, the Essex-Class Aircraft Carrier. This is not merely the story of a single ship, but the saga of American shipyards working around the clock, where molten steel flowed endlessly, and hundreds of thousands of men and women joined forces to construct a fleet of floating fortresses that altered the course of human history. In this first part, we explore how America emerged from a moment of seemingly total vulnerability to build the foundation of an unstoppable mobile fleet. When the war began, America relied on a handful of pre-war carriers, such as the Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet. But following the brutal engagements at Midway and the Coral Sea, the U.S. Navy's carrier strength was pushed to the absolute brink of exhaustion. The enemy believed they had broken the spine of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, unaware that America's true decisive weapons were being forged not on the open sea, but inside its home shipyards. Deep within the war rooms of Washington, D.C., engineers and admirals collaborated to draft a brand new carrier class, one designed to be larger, faster, more survivable, and infinitely more lethal than anything that had sailed before. This was the Essex class. In designing the Essex class, naval architects incorporated every hard-learned lesson from early wartime losses, measuring roughly 871 feet in length and displacing over 27,000 tons. Their magnitude was impressive, but their brilliance lay in balance. Engineers achieved a perfect harmony of speed, defensive armor, heavy firepower, and massive hangar capacity. A single Essex-class carrier could carry over 90 combat aircraft, including F-6F Hellcat fighters, SBD Dauntless dive bombers, and TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. It was effectively an entire strategic airbase capable of traveling at 33 knots across the globe. Bringing these giant airfields off the drawing board required an industrial effort at a scale the world had never witnessed. Shipyards across the country, including Newport News Shipbuilding, Brooklyn Navy Yard, and Bethlehem Steel's Fore River Yard underwent a massive revolution that shattered every historic construction benchmark. Traditionally, building a major fleet carrier took upwards of 3 to 4 years. For the Essex class, engineers pioneered modular construction and mass prefabrication. Massive steel subassemblies were manufactured in specialized factories, transported to the slipways, and welded together at astonishing speeds. Welding arcs illuminated shipyards through the darkest hours of the night. Thousands of women, famously symbolized by Rosie the Riveter, stepped up to operate heavy industrial machinery previously reserved for men. This unprecedented industrial mobilization yielded a miracle. Carriers that once took years to build were sliding down the launchways in just 14 to 16 months. The U.S. Navy placed orders for 32 Essex-Class carriers, 24 of which were completed during or immediately after the war. It remains the largest production run of capital warships in human history. When the lead ship, USS Essex, was commissioned in December 1942, it marked far more than a single addition to the fleet. It signaled a death sentence for enemy naval dominance. Shipyards began pumping out sister ships in rapid succession: USS Yorktown, USS Intrepid, USS Hornet, and USS Lexington, names deliberately resurrected from carriers lost earlier in the war to send an unmistakable message of resilience. The fundamental genius of the Essex class resided in its damage tolerance and operational flexibility. They featured double-hull construction and heavily armored gallery decks to absorb torpedo hits and bomb blasts. Their vast hangar decks provided mechanics ample room to repair, fuel, and rearm planes simultaneously. Furthermore, they were outfitted with state-of-the-art air search radars and dense anti-aircraft batteries, arrayed with dozens of dual 5-inch guns, 40mm Bofors, and 20mm Oerlikon cannons. An Essex carrier under attack could unleash a wall of flak and heavy lead, so dense that penetrating it was virtually suicidal for incoming aircrews. Modernized hydraulic catapults were also installed, allowing heavy strike planes to be launched in rapid succession regardless of wind conditions. A superior warship, however, is only as effective as the crew manning it. As these carriers left the shipyards, they were crewed by thousands of young, inexperienced recruits. To transform them into elite mariners, the United States executed a vast training infrastructure. On the Great Lakes, old paddle-wheel steamers were converted into makeshift training carriers, where novice aviators perfected carrier landings. By the time these crews stepped onto an Essex flight deck, they operated as a synchronized machine. The flight deck cupola coated in blue, yellow, red, and green shirt-sterned operations into a disciplined dance where every second was calculated. Launch intervals dropped so low that a full strike squadron could be airborne in a matter of minutes. By late 1943, the strategic posture in the Pacific had inverted. America transitioned from defensive holding actions to an aggressive, multi-pronged offensive. The famous Fast Carrier Task Force was formed with Essex-class carriers serving as its striking core. When this armada assembled on the horizon, it presented an unbroken wall of American steel and aviation power. Dozens of carriers, flanked by modern battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, formed a mobile task force of unprecedented strike power. The mission of this fleet was not merely to engage enemy ships, but to systematically obliterate fortified island strongholds across the Central Pacific. During the campaigns in the Gilbert, Marshall, and Mariana Islands, the Essex carriers showcased their true strength. Waves of Hellcats and Helldivers roared off their decks, raining high explosives onto enemy bases, severing supply lines, and providing air cover for amphibious landings. Yet, the ultimate test of their design resilience was still to come, as the fleet pushed deeper into home waters, heading toward the largest naval clashes in human history and an unyielding new weapon born of desperation. By mid-1944, the air battles over the Pacific reached a violent crescendo. In June 1944, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, famously dubbed the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, the Essex-Class Carriers delivered a masterclass in modern carrier operations. Directed by advanced shipboard combat information centers using long-range radar, Essex launched Hellcats, intercepted incoming strike waves, destroying over 300 enemy aircraft in a single day. The enemy's naval air arm, carefully built over a decade, was permanently dismantled in less than 24 hours, as American forces closed in on the main islands. The enemy deployed a radical and terrifying tactic, the kamikaze. Suicide pilots, flying aircraft packed with high explosives and full fuel tanks, hurled themselves directly into the flight decks and superstructures of American warships. The kamikaze was designed not just as a military countermeasure, but as a psychological weapon intended to paralyze American crews through sheer terror. This threat tested the structural endurance of the Essex class to its absolute limits. During the epic Battle of Leyte Gulf and subsequent operations off the coast of Japan, kamikaze strikes intensified. Ships like the USS Intrepid, USS Essex, USS Saratoga, and USS Bunker Hill took brutal direct hits. When an explosive-laden plane crashed into a flight deck at hundreds of miles per hour, the result was an immediate inferno of burning aviation fuel, detonating ordnance, and jagged shrapnel. Under such conditions, weaker ships would have split open and sunk. But the Essex class was engineered specifically to survive catastrophic damage. The ordeal of the U.S. Franklin in March 1945 remains one of the most legendary examples of warship survival. While operating mere miles from the Japanese mainland, the Franklin was surprised by a single dive bomber that dropped 2 armor-piercing bombs through her flight deck into the crowded hangar below, where fully fueled and armed planes were preparing to launch. Massive chain reaction explosions tore through the deck, turning the ship into a raging furnace and claiming the lives of over 800 crew members. On almost any other warship, an explosion of that magnitude would have resulted in an order to abandon ship. Yet, thanks to heavy structural bulkheads, advanced fire foam suppression systems, and the unbelievable courage of her surviving crew, the Franklin was saved. The fires were contained, the engines were brought back online, and the heavily scorched carrier limped thousands of miles back to Pearl Harbor and eventually Brooklyn under her own power. Out of the 24 Essex-class carriers built and deployed during World War II, not a single ship was sunk by enemy action. This incredible record stands unrivaled in the annals of naval history. Their survivability was rooted in decentralized damage control organization, heavy fire curtains on the hangar decks, high-capacity water pumps, and rigorous crew training that enabled sailors to combat catastrophic damage within seconds of impact. By August 1945, the Essex fleet had swept the Pacific clear of surface and air resistance. Their air groups provided close air support for the grueling landings at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, struck military targets, and participated in the sinking of the giant Japanese battleship Yamato the ultimate symbol of traditional gunline warfare. The destruction of the Yamato by carrier-borne aircraft signaled the final transition into a new military paradigm. The aircraft carrier was the undisputed sovereign of the ocean when World War II concluded. The Essex class had proven its worth beyond question, but its story was far from over. While thousands of wartime vessels were scrapped, the inherent adaptability of the Essex hull design allowed these ships to transition seamlessly into the Cold War era. The dawn of the jet age introduced heavier, faster aircraft that traditional wartime flight decks could not easily support. Rather than retiring the fleet, the U.S. Navy executed comprehensive modernization programs, known as SCB-27A and SCB-125. Engineers sliced open the flight decks to install angled landing strips, replaced hydraulic launchers with powerful steam catapults, reinforced elevators, and added enclosed hurricane bows. These retrofits allowed World War II hull designs to launch and recover heavy supersonic jet fighters with ease. When the Korean War broke out in 1950, modernized Essex carriers were back on the front lines, providing critical close air support and interdiction strikes. A decade later, during the Vietnam War, ships like the USS Intrepid and USS Ticonderoga. Beyond military operations, the Essex class played an indispensable role in the space race. As NASA launched its historic Gemini and Apollo missions, Essex carriers were designated as the primary recovery ships for returning astronauts. When Apollo 11 returned from the moon after making humanity's first lunar landing, it was the Essex-class USS Hornet that plucked Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins safely out of the Pacific Ocean. Gradually, through the 1970s and 1980s, after decades of continuous service spanning 3 major wars and the space age, these legendary ships were finally decommissioned. While some were used in weapon testing, 4 were preserved as historic monuments. Today, the USS Intrepid in New York, the USS Yorktown in South Carolina, the USS Lexington in Texas, and the USS Hornet in California serve as floating museums, allowing future generations to walk the decks of history. The Essex-class carriers were far more than vast assemblies of steel, engines, and weaponry. They represented the peak of industrial mobilization, masterful naval architecture, and human courage. Built by American shipyards in a time of supreme crisis, this fleet dominated the oceans, reshaped global warfare, and secured a legacy as the most unstoppable mobile airfields ever to sail the seas.